Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited to be covering the San Antonio Spurs here in a new mini-series leading up to the NBA trade deadline where we talk about trade predictions for each and every NBA team. Today starting with the San Antonio Spurs. So if you're a new viewer to the channel, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more. Remember, I'm going to have trade deadline live streams coming up. We'll talk about that more in just a second. And if you're a big time Spurs fan, what I want you to do, comment right now down below. Go Spurs Go in the comment section. I'm going to be leaving little hearts on every single Go Spurs Go comment. So let's jump into it here with that video preview now. We're going to talk about 3 predictions for the San Antonio Spurs ahead of the 2025 NBA trade deadline. Now, some of these predictions may range from specific trades or which player they could go after or which exact deal I expect them to make, and some of them might be a little bit more vague and organizational goals for a team to kind of target at the deadline, looking to get involved as a third team in a trade, for example. So there's a variety of different predictions in today's video. And again, here's that big reminder. I will be live on the channel the entire week of the NBA trade deadline. So this is going to be your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about the NBA trade deadline. There will be daily videos coming out throughout the week of the trade deadline, as well as daily live streams that will span for hours and hours and hours. So if you're at work looking for something to do, bring some earbuds so you can tune into the streams. Really appreciate you guys for all your continued support over the years. And I'm really looking forward to the trade deadline live streams once again this year. So let's start with prediction number 1 here for the San Antonio Spurs. And that prediction is that the Spurs will ultimately target and land at least one far out future first round pick, whether it just be an unprotected pick, a lightly protected pick, or some form of pick swap. The Spurs have been very active in the past, and by far out future first, I'm talking about the years 2029, 2030, and 2031. There's a few different teams that I could see them preying on in this example as well. The Milwaukee Bucks could be a team to watch. The Miami Heat with the Jimmy Butler saga could make some sense. The Los Angeles Clippers is a team that's been playing very good basketball for a majority of the season, even when Kawhi Leonard was out. Now with Kawhi and James Harden both there together, I think the Clippers should be looked at as a very competitive Western Conference team and a team that probably wants to push some of their chips in to improve their roster. The 76ers, now, their season hasn't gone quite to plan, so I'm not sure how active Philly will be. They don't really have a lot of tradable salaries either, but maybe they could be in the realm of discussion here. My Dallas Mavericks could be a team to watch for too, and the Los Angeles Lakers. And you might be saying, okay, well, why would the Spurs be the team that gets involved here? What veteran player are they trading out to get a deal done? Which player do the Bucks or Heat or Clippers or Mavericks or Lakers want in return to get that 2029, 2030, or 2031 first round pick? And this prediction really doesn't stem on the Spurs trading away a player for a pick. What it stems on is being the third team navigator, the third team facilitator in a trade to help get something done. The Spurs have such a deep collection of assets. You think about the Hawks picks going forward. You think about some of their other picks that they've already been acquiring in this kind of time range. In 2029 through 2031, they have access to Timberwolves picks, they have access to a Kings pick, they have access to a Mavericks pick. They've been very active and very aggressive with opening up their trade catalog by making trades with teams who are desperate for upgrades. They also have a Bulls asset in the next couple of years. So this team just has so many different draft picks and draft assets, and it's been from creative trades. The DeMar DeRozan sign-in trade to Sacramento is what brought that Kings pick in the first place. Facilitating the Grant Williams sign and trade to Dallas is what brought in that Mavericks pick. Then you think about their draft night trade of Rob Dillingham to Minnesota. The Wolves were willing to send a 2030 pick and a 2031 pick. So with that in mind, the Spurs have been very active at acquiring future first round picks. I've talked about this on the channel before at length, so some of you have probably already heard something similar to this from me. But it really stems from them wanting to continue accumulating draft assets for flexibility and for roster improvements down the road when the roster gets a bit more expensive and when Victor Wembanyama is on a supermax contract in the heart of his prime trying to lead the Spurs to winning ways. I think you look back to the way that they won with Tim Duncan. They cashed in some of their late picks, a huge success story on Manu Ginobili. You think about the huge success story on Tony Parker with where they drafted him. Then you think back to the George Hill trade, trading for pick number 15 in what was honestly a very risky move. George Hill had been a very good core player for the Spurs for a little bit of time at that point. They took a big risk, traded him for the pick that became Kawhi Leonard, and that's what bridged the second era of Spurs winning ways and ultimately another championship. And I think for San Antonio, they've learned from that and realized, look, when we're a really good team, when we're an elite team, it's going to be hard to continue adding top-end talent to our roster, especially from kind of a natural standpoint where you're growing and developing players, something San Antonio always does so well. So with that in mind, they've been going out and targeting these future first-round picks. And for a team like Milwaukee, who might be involved in some way in the Jimmy Butler sweepstakes, whether it be for Zach LaVine or Bradley Beal, the Bucks don't have a ton of assets to give. And you might be wondering, well, why do the Spurs get these first-round picks and not the other team giving up value? It's because the Spurs can give up upcoming picks. You think about their pick this year, you think about the Hawks pick this year. The Spurs have a lot of upcoming draft assets and ones that kind of project to be a little bit less valuable than maybe far out future ones. And the Spurs, they have enough front office stability there that you could see their ownership, their GM, their front office making decisions for long-term moves, whereas other GMs who are maybe under scrutiny or potentially at risk of losing their job in the next couple of years need to make some more win-now moves currently, try and target picks in the upcoming future rather than the distant future. And that's the luxury the Spurs have right now with Victor Wembanyama. I think everyone's job is safe there for a while currently, and it gives them a lot of organizational flexibility to go out, make a trade for the future, make a winning trade that will help their franchise long term. And I think that we could really see them take advantage of some of these teams. For example, Dallas, maybe there's significant interest in Herb Jones. The Spurs have the assets to help Dallas maybe acquire Herb Jones, but it will cost Dallas a future first that would be extremely valuable down the road in the event that Luka Doncic leaves the Mavericks at some point. There's no certainty that that ever happens, but the Spurs are going to start taking bets against certain teams and taking bets against certain organizations that they think that they're going to be better than by 2029, by 2030, or by 2031. So when it comes to prediction number 2, they do have to have some kind of way to at least get involved in these deals. And, I talked about the draft pick collection and how that's going to be useful. The Spurs could also be seen taking in money in these deals. So not only are they going to be a facilitator by using, near future draft picks for distant future draft picks, they're also going to be a team that could facilitate money. So you think about Jusuf Nurkic. If the Suns want to get off of Jusuf Nurkic, Zach Collins could be an ideal candidate for kind of a 3-team swap where Zach Collins, listen, he's not been a great player for the Spurs, especially this season, but he's on a contract that is slightly cheaper than Jusuf Nurkic, so it works financially in some kind of trade with the Phoenix Suns. And if the Suns ultimately don't find a real suitor for Jusuf Nurkic, someone who's actually willing to eat his contract, I could see the Spurs looking at themselves internally and saying, Zach Collins is not vital to us long term. We can include Zach Collins in this deal. He's slightly cheaper than Jusuf Nurkic, will probably be perceived as a slightly better contract in the league. Maybe they can jump into a trade with Phoenix that way and help get a deal done. Or maybe they're involved in some other 3-team trade. I already mentioned the possibility of Herb Jones. Maybe they're somehow involved in the Jimmy Butler sweepstakes, which I don't fully expect, but maybe. There's a few different pathways out here where San Antonio will look to get involved. Now, they also have contracts like Harrison Barnes and Chris Paul. I just don't really know if I see them being included in trades. I think the way I looked at it before the season was the Spurs were looking to be competitive without pushing their chips in and trying to be a true playoff team this year. I think they looked at this year as a big development year for their young guys. We've seen a lot of that. If you're a Spurs fan, you should be extremely excited about the futures, not only of Victor Wembanyama, who looks like a top 5 player in the world already, which is unsurprising to me, but you also look at the development of some of their other young guys. Devin Vassell, I think, continues to take steps as a scorer of the basketball and a shooter of the basketball. He's been impressive when he's been on the court this year in the moments that I've seen him play, which has been quite a few, but I've just always kind of secretly really liked Devin Vassell as a player. I think his tools are very, very useful around a player like Victor Wembanyama especially. And then Jeremy Sohan, someone who probably doesn't get the media love he deserves. I think he's taken a very, very significant step forward in his development from where he was a year ago plus to where he is presently now. Last year I had the opportunity to speak with Greg Popovich actually, and I really hope he's doing well and recovering from his stroke. Obviously, prayers up for Popovich, but When I asked Popovich about Jeremy Sochan and the development, he had referenced that it's basically a whole new world for him. And I think we saw that on the court, some of the struggles last year, some of the difficulties of him adjusting to being in a more on-ball role. But now, a year removed from that situation, I think we've seen the development in that area, the experience and what it's brought to him as a player, being a little bit more comfortable. When there's backcourt pressure on guards, he's comfortable taking the ball and advancing it up the court past the timeline. You also see him more comfortable in short roll scenarios. You see him more comfortable in 2-on-1s, 3-on-2s as a transition player. I think we've seen a lot of real growth from him. The playmaking, I think, has taken a significant stride forward from where he was a couple of years ago as a prospect out of Baylor. You guys know I do so many deep dives on college basketball players, and obviously the draft coverage on the channel here is very, very deep and thorough. So I think from where he was a few years ago with the Baylor Bears to where he is now as a player, we've seen significant strides, significant growth, and I think the defensive play, the playmaking, and kind of the gap-filling role that he fills for San Antonio is so good. So with the Spurs currently focused on development that we've seen from a lot of their young players, they don't need to make this, big win-now trade or this big teardown trade either. They like the veterans' roles there. I think they're in a spot where they're going to be okay with moving Zach Collins if something materializes as a third team in order to help, quote-unquote help, some other team, but the Spurs are going to be secretly predators in this kind of deal as well. And then prediction number 3, I kind of alluded to it here in this last little bit, but I don't see a big splash trade for the San Antonio Spurs. Now listen, De'Aaron Fox, Trae Young are great players. Brandon Ingram is a very unique offensively skilled player as well with great length and size. And then Jonathan Kuminga, obviously a very young player. But when you look at the kind of overall pyramid of potential players that I could see the Spurs targeting or being interested in acquiring, I just don't think this is the year to do it. Now, you might say, well, they have some salaries. They have the Chris Paul expiring. They have Harrison Barnes. They have Zach Collins' contract. They do presently have the money to get to some of these numbers. But I think, first of all, they want to see what this young core can become. And I think, there's a lot of optimism around this young team going forward, not only because Victor Wembanyama is going to be the best player in the NBA at some point in time, especially from a two-way perspective, but when you consider the collection of young players, the draft picks, the future assets, this team shouldn't feel a lot of pressure. They have significant trade flexibility moving forward. They have other contracts that could be included as well, like Keldon Johnson, for example. And I think for the Spurs too, I haven't even mentioned Steph Castle yet. They really love him too. They want to continue giving these guys opportunities to grow. And if you make some big splash trade, not only is it going to cost you one or two of these young guys, but it's also going to take the ball out of their hands if they're still a player on the team, especially if you trade for Trae Young or De'Aaron Fox. That would be your lead point guard of the future. Now, I do have some things to say here. I do really like De'Aaron Fox. I know some Spurs fans would be very interested in acquiring De'Aaron Fox if he was ultimately available for San Antonio. I think De'Aaron Fox would be great there. I think his downhill force, the pull-up shot making, and specifically the clutch play would all be really great tools and things to put around Victor Wembanyama. But if there's a dream fit in the NBA, it is Trae Young in San Antonio. Now, again, I don't think this happens at the 2025 NBA trade deadline, but I do really want to spend this moment to talk about what Trae Young could really look like in San Antonio. And I think right now there's a significant misperception around the league about Trae Young and if he's good enough, can you win a title with Trae Young? The conversations on winning, losing, Atlanta's been honestly mid for the last few years. You think about their record, honestly, always hovering around 500. And a lot of people will look at that as a negative, and I just don't really understand that line of thinking. Trae Young is by far the best player on the Atlanta Hawks. He is what makes their entire offense run. He is the engine to their team. And he does it at 6'1". And the reason that he's capable of doing it, even though he's extremely small and light, and yes, there are some defensive deficiencies there, although I think that's been improved this year by significant effort on that end of the floor. I think his closeouts have been better this year as well, and just the overall attention to detail in the rotations and assignments he's defending. Trae Young, after watching Chris Paul with Victor Wembanyama this year, the beautiful play in the pick and roll of an elite point guard who understands team defenses, who understands where the weak points are, and has still just a little bit of that creativity as both a scorer and a passer. How that has looked in San Antonio has been tremendous with Victor Wembanyama. And now I think looking forward, if you could acquire a player like Trae Young who is just about to emerge into his prime, and instead of casting him as the 1A sole offensive engine of a team, Imagine casting him as your 1B, the guy who is your pressure reliever instead of the go-to guy, the guy who is your ball handler, decision maker, without having to also be the primary scorer at all times. And I think if I'm going to liken it to a fit, I want to go back to James Harden and Joel Embiid in Philadelphia. That two-man game was splendid. And you think about Joel Embiid constantly catching the ball in the short roll, catching it around the nail. James Harden manipulating, navigating the pick and roll, making the right play pretty much every single time. Now, it does come with turnovers, right? But Trae Young is that kind of player. He's probably the best lob passer in the NBA right now. You think about pairing that with Victor Wembanyama. You think about pairing that with some of San Antonio's other young athletic players. And then you also think about Trae Young's gravity. And I think this is really the point that really stands out to me. If you're defending Trae Young in the pick and roll, a high ball screen, you're going to blitz him. Teams are deathly afraid of him shooting threes. Now, I know people are going to say, well, his three-point percentage is down this year. It really doesn't matter to me what the three-point percentage actually is, and I know some people might roll their eyes at that. It matters how you get defended. It matters how you get covered. That's why guys who don't get defended and shoot 31% from three are so much significantly worse for your team offense than players who get blitzed and defended all over the court and shoot 31% from three. The effect on team defense Trae Young has is really, really stark. And I think if you dream about putting Victor Wembanyama in the dunker spot and having Jeremy Sohan as a screen and dive player, you get him the ball at the free throw line. And he utilizes some of those developmental strides we've talked about already in this video as either kind of like a Draymond Green type of role where he catches at the free throw line, either tries to attack the rim and score, or throws the ball up in the air where only Victor Wembanyama can catch it. That's a very intriguing kind of three-man game where it really stems from Trae Young getting probably blitzed or at least switched onto on the perimeter. Otherwise, if you don't want Sohan involved in the pick and roll, which I think would be beautiful if he was, look at how Jalen Johnson's played in Atlanta with Trae Young. I think if you want to include Victor Wembanyama directly, you have this dynamic pick and pop game, something Trae Young hasn't had the luxury of playing with a ton. In Atlanta, he spent a majority of his time with Clint Capella, Onyeka Okongwu, inside bigs, kind of more rolling bigs. Victor Wembanyama would be like this massive security blanket for Trae Young. The possibilities would be endless between those two offensively because of the different spots on the floor that Wembanyama can score and operate from, and also the pure size and wingspan and length of his frame would give Trae Young this enormous passing window. He's already arguably the best passer in basketball at times. Now, people will say Jokic, people will say Luka Doncic. I don't have any qualms about that, but you look at the overall usage, the overall reliance from his team on his play, Trae Young has a significant, enormous gap over everybody in the assist column this year, and it's because he is the engine. He's one of the best passers in basketball in the pick and roll, real creativity, and despite his size deficiencies, there's just so much talent to work with that even though I don't think San Antonio makes this splash trade now, I would not rule it out in the future. I do think Trae Young is such an enormous, perfect fit in San Antonio with Wembanyama. Now, again, I'm not saying it's happening now. In fact, I'm saying the opposite. I'm saying it will not happen this trade deadline, but I would not hate it long term if San Antonio pulled the trigger. We also have a bonus prediction. Thank you to everyone who has made it to this part of the video. My final bonus prediction here. I think the Spurs steal one of either Jalen Hood-Schifino or MarJon Beauchamp. Remember, before this season, these two players had their team options decline, former first-round picks. Jalen Hood-Schifino drafted over Cam Whitmore. MarJon Beauchamp was a first-round pick by Milwaukee. Both of them have uncertain futures in the NBA. Beauchamp does not have a huge role in San Antonio. Jalen Hood-Schifino essentially does not play at all for the Los Angeles Lakers. Beauchamp very rarely plays for Milwaukee. So these are two players who are still very young, in their early 20s. I think the Spurs could look at them as possible developmental grabs. And I think, again, one of the key frameworks in this entire video, one of the key ideas is that the Spurs will be active as a third team. They'll be the third team suitor for a majority of potential trades this trade deadline. I think trying to get their hands on a MarJon Beauchamp or a Jalen Hood-Schifino, who might just flat out be salary dumped. These two players might just get traded wherever for whatever these teams can get. Milwaukee doesn't have any long-term plans with Beauchamp. Hood-Schifino, again, not a core part of Los Angeles' future. If you can maybe bet on the pedigree here as former first-round picks, players that teams thought were going to be good coming into the NBA. Now, I wasn't very high on Beauchamp myself, but there are a lot of athletic tools, and I think Hood-Schifino would be such an interesting one to acquire because I think giving him an opportunity to learn the point guard position from Chris Paul for a couple of months before the season's end would be really instrumental for trying to resurrect his career. You go back to his Indiana tape, he's someone who handled the ball a lot, working with Trace Jackson Davis in the pick and roll, and honestly was a great lead ball handler for the Hoosiers. Now, the college game is way different than the NBA game. I'm not saying Jalen Hood-Schifino is going to become this great starting point guard in the NBA, but I think if there's a team that can afford an opportunity to some of these young players, the Spurs might be that opportunity because, one, they'll already be involved in 3-team trades probably, and then secondly, they could give some developmental run to some of these guys, and then also it maybe would help their draft pick positioning as well. If they're not going to be a playoff team, losing a couple more games at the end of the year might not hurt as well when it comes to your actual lottery odds and draft position too. So I'm not suggesting that they tank, but playing some more young guys at the end of the year wouldn't be the worst idea either for San Antonio. Really hope you guys did enjoy. Thanks all so much for watching. Really hope you enjoyed the content here at Utility Sports. If you did, leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more, and don't forget, we have those live streams coming on the channel very, very soon for the week of the NBA trade deadline. So stay tuned for that, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.